We often hear about the external barriers women face in their careers, the glass ceiling, unequal pay, lack of representation. And yeah, those are absolutely real critical issues. They demand attention, action.
Definitely. Huge issues.
But the sources you've shared for this deep dive, they take us on a fascinating detour, don't they? Highlighting something less discussed.
That's right. Something that, in some ways, can be even tougher because it lives inside us.
The internal stuff.
Exactly. This material really zeroes in on the idea that beyond the, necessary societal and institutional changes we need, there are also these internal obstacles, things women sometimes, maybe unknowingly, place on themselves.
That's a really crucial layer, often overlooked, I think.
It really is.
Okay, let's really dive into this then. Our mission today is to take these sources, the articles, the research, the perspectives you've gathered, and just pull out the absolute most important nuggets for you listening.
Yeah, try to give you a really clear picture, the challenges this material says women face, the data points that back it up.
And some of the practical advice offered, right? For navigating career advancement, work-life balance, those tricky gender dynamics,
It's about understanding what the source says is happening.
and why it truly matters. Okay, so where do we start? Big picture.
Yeah, let's set the scene. Based on what this material paints, it suggests that, well, decades after we expected more equality.
Things haven't quite evolved as fast as hoped.
Not really, no. The world hasn't kept pace.
And the source highlights a really striking core problem there. It's about highly trained women, right? Compared to their male counterparts.
Yes. With similar backgrounds, they're scaling back, or even dropping out of the workforce entirely, in really significant numbers.
You see that so clearly in the data points, like post-graduation employment rates.
Oh, yeah. Looking at surveys, say, from Harvard grads or Chicago Booth grads, maybe 15 years out.
The men are still mostly working full-time, like 90% plus.
Consistently, yes. But for women, especially women with children, that rate can plummet down to maybe 50, 60%. That's a huge difference.
Wow, a massive gap. And the material points to some familiar contributing factors.
It does. The ones we often discuss. There's that classic timing clash, career demands peaking right when biology suggests starting a family.
Yep, and the home front challenge.
Hmm.
Partners not always sharing the load housework, childcare evenly,
Right. Leaving one person, usually the woman, shouldering more.
and the workplace itself. Still not flexible enough, generally.
Not evolving fast enough to consistently offer the kind of flexibility that's really needed to manage both work and home.
Okay. But as we said, where this material really digs deeper is how women internalize all this pressure.
Exactly. How that internalization itself becomes a significant obstacle, something they place on themselves.
Now, it's important to say the sources aren't ignoring the big picture, are they?
No, not at all. They're very aware that most women face huge economic struggles and that big-scale changes, paid leave, affordable childcare, real flexibility, those are absolutely critical for true equality.
But they argue that looking at what individuals can control,
Right. Understanding and tackling those internal hurdles, that's also a necessary part of the equation, especially for women who do have opportunities and choices.
Okay, so let's zero in. This is where it gets really interesting, I think. What are some of these specific internal hurdles the sources identify?
Well, one of the first they talk about is what they call the ambition gap.
The ambition gap, meaning
It's a finding based on survey data suggesting women are just less likely than men to aspire to the very, very top jobs. CEO, managing partner, that sort of thing.
and it's not just aiming lower from the start. It's also about scaling back later.
Yeah. When executives are asked if they've reduced their career goals, women say yes more often than men.
And the reason they give.
Often it's about the anticipated personal or family sacrifices. It's almost like a preemptive downshifting.
Wow. Okay, and tied into that, there's another big one. Imposter syndrome.
Ah, yes. That feeling impacts so many people, but the sources suggest it's particularly prevalent or maybe particularly impactful for women in certain situations.
That horrible feeling like you're a fraud. Right.
Yeah.
You don't deserve your success, and any minute now, everyone's going to find out.
That's exactly it. And the source gives some incredibly powerful examples.
Like the study with surgery students.
Yeah. The women students consistently rated their own performance lower than the men did.
Even though the faculty.
Even though the faculty ratings actually show the women were performing better, Their self-perception was totally misaligned with reality.
That's incredible. And there was one about political candidates, too.
Right. Similar credentials, but the men were something like 60% more likely to feel very qualified to run.
Wow. And Harvard law students rating themselves lower on skills?
The same pattern. The material really makes the case that this internalizing of failure, this feeling of inadequacy, it doesn't just feel bad.
It actually hurts you going forward.
Yeah, it can genuinely impact your willingness to try again, your future performance.
And while that's internal, there's an external piece that feeds it too, right?
Yeah.
The external attribution of success.
Yes, exactly. That tendency for others, colleagues, the media, sometimes even ourselves, to credit a woman's achievements to outside factors.
It's like, oh, she was lucky, or she had a great mentor, right place, right time.
Exactly. Whereas a man's success, much more likely attributed to his skill, his hard work, his, innate talent.
I remember that anecdote from the source about the New York Times article after the Facebook IPO.
Hmm.
It called the author lucky.
And what was really striking was her realization.
That she'd been telling herself the same thing.
Right. It shows how deep that external attribution can go. It shapes how we even see our own accomplishments.
Which must directly impact the next thing the sources talk about, actually reaching for opportunities.
It absolutely does. There's a difference observed in how men and women approach this.
How so? What did they see?
Well, using observations from a place like Google, this source noted that men were often impatient about their development.
Impatient how?
Actively banging down doors, asking for projects, pitching themselves for roles, sometimes even before a job was officially open. They just believed they could do more and went for it.
While the women
Tended to be more cautious, less likely to speak up, less likely to push themselves forward, often needing encouragement to try for those stretch roles or new areas.
So the message is, opportunities aren't just handed out.
Rarely. You have to actively reach, seize them. And doing that, especially if you're fighting imposter feelings or worried about perception, takes confidence, or at least faking it till you make it.
That willingness to step up or even project confidence brings us to what I found one of the most, well, frankly, frustrating points in the material.
The success and likability penalty.
Yes. Yeah.
It's absolutely a core paradox they identify. For men, generally, success leads to positive reinforcement. They're seen as go-getters, competent leaders. They actually tend to get more liked as they succeed.
But for women,
Often the opposite. Achieving success, especially in male-dominated fields or leadership roles, frequently leads to unfavorable views. Less likable.
seen as aggressive or selfish or bossy.
Exactly. The famous Heidi Howard study they cite just lays it bare.
Right. Same exact biography of a successful entrepreneur.
Identical bio. But when the name's Howard, he's great, a go-getter, hire him.
And when the name's Heidi?
Suddenly she's selfish, political, maybe not someone you'd want to work for, despite the same achievements.
And the source points out, this bias comes from everyone, right? Men and women.
Yes, that's crucial. Both men and women showed this bias and this penalty. It's cited as a huge reason women might hold back, internalize those hurdles, and why they get held back by others, too.
It explains all those awful labels successful women get slapped with.
Sadly, yes. Attila the hen, the old witch. It's a real, observable thing, even today.
And this penalty must have a direct impact on something like negotiation.
Oh, absolutely. The sources explain that even when a woman does negotiate successfully for salary, resources, whatever, she can pay a price.
In goodwill, future opportunities.
Potentially, yes. There's this fear that being assertive, asking for what you deserve, will just be seen negatively.
Like that story the author tells about negotiating her own package with Mark Zuckerberg,
Yeah.
hesitating because she was afraid of.
Of botching the deal, yeah. Or just being seen as difficult.
And it took her brother-in-law basically saying,
Why are you going to make less than any man? Such a blunt, necessary push.
and then Zuckerberg himself later told her that her desire to be liked could hold her back.
It just underscores how real that penalty feels and how it operates, even at the very highest levels.
Wow. Okay. So those are some major hurdles, internal feelings, external perceptions. Given all that, how does the material suggest actually, plotting your course professionally?
It introduces a really great metaphor, actually. Careers aren't ladders.
Not just straight up one rung after another.
No, they're more like jungle gyms.
Oh, I like that. Multiple paths, different directions, sideways moves.
Exactly. The advice isn't about rigidly climbing some predefined ladder. It's more about prioritizing potential for fast growth. Finding a company mission you believe in.
Even if a job title or level isn't strictly higher than your last one?
Sometimes, yes. The author uses her own path as an example: World Bank in India, Google without a tech background, COO at Facebook for a much younger CEO. None were obvious next steps up, maybe.
But they offered huge growth potential and aligned with what she wanted to do.
Right. Wanting to change the world, as she put it. It contrasts that with a friend who turned down a job because it felt like going back 4 years, level-wise.
Instead of seeing it as moving forward onto a totally new, maybe better path on that jungle gym.
Exactly. Seeing the connections, the opportunities across the structure, not just up it.
And within this jungle gym navigation, mentorship and sponsorship come up. They make a distinction.
A really important one. Mentors give advice, guidance. Invaluable.
Those sponsors.
Sponsors are the power players. They're advocates, people in positions of influence who actively use it for you.
Speaking up when you're not in the room. Putting your name forward.
Yes.
Yeah.
Creating opportunities. And the perspective offered isn't about asking, will you be my mentor?
No. How then?
It's more about focusing on your performance, your potential. Excel and you will get a mentor is the phrase used. The relationships tend to develop organically when you show your value.
And be prepared when you do seek input, right?
Yeah.
Specific questions, not just venting.
Definitely. Be focused. Respect their time.
They also mention a barrier specific to cross-gender mentoring or sponsorship.
Yeah, fear factor, misinterpretation, gossip, even concerns about inappropriate behavior. It creates this double bind.
Where women need sponsors who are often senior men.
But the reluctance to have informal contact because of those fears actually holds them back.
So what do they suggest?
Things like having clear policies, maybe breakfast or lunch only for informal meetings, but applying them evenly to everyone, not singling women out, it reduces the awkwardness and potential for misinterpretation.
It seems like creating an environment where diverse perspectives are genuinely sought is key too. Like the story about Secretary Robert Rubin.
Oh yeah, asking everyone in the room for input, even the author sitting in the back who felt she knew nothing about the topic initially.
It shows that good ideas can come from anywhere, but only if you actually ask and listen.
Absolutely. And that kind of openness ties into the idea of bringing your whole self to work.
Meaning ditching the old, strict separation between professional and personal.
The material argues it's outdated, yeah, and often counterproductive. Being, appropriately honest about personal situations, like the author sharing about her divorce when declining a job, can actually build trust.
Rather than causing confusion later if you seem distracted or something.
Exactly. Authenticity can be a strength.
Okay, so we've covered internal hurdles, navigating the career jungle gym. How does all this connect back to home life, partnership, that myth of doing it all?
Right. Well, it tackles that have it all or even do it all idea head on, saying basically you can't. Not perfectly, anyway.
Which is kind of freeing, actually.
It is. They share the motto from a Facebook poster. Done is better than perfect. A great mantra.
In Nora Ephron's advice, embrace the mess.
Same sentiment. It acknowledges the massive pressures, the sacrifices. The author talks about her own struggle, feeling guilty leaving work at 5:30 for dinner because the culture valued, total devotion.
There's an interesting irony pointed out, too, isn't there? About why women sometimes leave the workforce.
Yeah, it's not always because they don't want to work. Sometimes it's because they ended up in jobs that were, unsatisfying.
Maybe jobs they took thinking they'd be easier to manage with family.
Perhaps. But the sources argue it's the compelling, challenging jobs that actually make women want to stay in the workforce or make them eager to return after having kids.
Which leads to a key piece of advice: the time before having kids.
That is not the time to pull back or lean out. That's the critical time to lean in. Push forward, keep your options wide open.
There's that anecdote about the author asking a potential hire about her family plans, which sounds tricky legally.
Acknowledged as tricky, yes, but framed as trying to ensure the woman wasn't prematurely limiting her own future career options before she even needed to. It's controversial, but the intent described was supportive.
And they offer Caroline O'Connor as an example, treating starting a company and having a baby like a design challenge.
Yeah, questioning assumptions, finding solutions, becoming a career-loving parent. It's about proactively shaping things.
But of course, the sources acknowledge leaning in isn't always possible for everyone. Circumstances differ hugely.
Absolutely. Economics, support, health. The author herself shares passing on the LinkedIn CEO job when she wanted a second child. It's about making intentional choices based on your priorities at that time, not some universal mandate.
And the material is stark about the penalty for taking time out of the workforce.
Oh, it's brutal. The data shows lower reemployment rates and a huge earnings hit, like a 20% decrease after just 1 year out.
20%, and even more after longer breaks.
Yeah, around 30% after 2 or 3 years. It's dramatic. And the sources argue really powerfully that if society truly valued the work of raising kids and managing a home,
Our policies would reflect that. Paid leave, childcare, flexibility.
exactly, those things would reduce these massive financial penalties. The lack of them shows what we don't value enough collectively.
Which brings us squarely to partnership at home, which the sources present as pretty much essential.
Absolutely critical, especially if both partners work. True partnership is non-negotiable for making it work and for sanity.
Like the story about the author's husband, Dave, having to step up as primary caregiver when she was injured after childbirth.
Yeah, learning on the fly. It shows how dynamics can shift, how competence can be built, but also how an initial imbalance strained their marriage until they actively rebalance.
And the core advice for co-parenting they offer is,
Yeah.
well, deceptively simple.
Let your partner do things their way.
Right, the diaper on the head example. If you constantly correct or take over,
You end up doing it all yourself, every single time. True sharing means each partner genuinely owns tasks or areas, figures out their own way.
no gatekeeping.
Exactly. Gatekeeping by wives, the source argues, just increases their own workload eventually. It's counterproductive.
So finding a truly equal partner is key. Someone who wants that equality, values ambition, wants to share the load at home.
Yes. They even mention the idea that this kind of equality is sexy. It's about mutual respect, shared effort.
And while acknowledging stay-at-home parenting is real, valuable work,
Absolutely. A huge contribution.
the sources touch on the guilt factor,
Mm.
especially for mothers.
Yeah, that quote, show me a woman without guilt and I'll show you a man.
Yo.
It just resonates because that societal pressure on women is so pervasive, whatever their choice.
But maybe the most, I don't know, relieving data point in all this comes from that big NICHD study on child outcomes.
Oh, absolutely. That one is huge. 15 years tracking kids.
And the finding basically blows up a common assumption, right?
Completely. It found that kids cared for only by their mothers did not develop differently, better or worse than kids also cared for by others.
Wow. So it wasn't about who did the child care, primarily.
No. The study found parental behavior mattered way more. Things like responsive fathers, engaged mothers, the stability and warmth in the parents' relationship.
That influenced outcomes 2 or 3 times more than the form of childcare.
Exactly. The source quotes it directly. Exclusive maternal care was not related to better or worse outcomes for children. There's just no data to support the idea that mothers harm their kids by working.
And there was a UK study mentioned, too, finding highest well-being in kids from 2-job families.
Right. This data is just such a powerful antidote to that guilt narrative women carry.
It really shifts the focus, doesn't it? Away from perfection and towards maybe achievable goals for happiness. For the whole family.
Focusing on what's most important for you and your family. Happy, thriving kids is the goal. The perfect St. Patrick's Day shirt, optional.
Embrace the mess. Embrace the done.
Exactly. So bringing it all together, the material really pushes for the importance of actually talking about these gender issues, the biases, the dynamics.
Even though it's uncomfortable or feels risky.
Yeah. It's presented as the necessary path for minds to open, for institutions to actually evolve.
It acknowledges the challenges, fear of seeming unprofessional legal worries for companies.
But it gives concrete examples of change, too, like Harvard Business School actively examining its culture, redefining leadership, changing classroom dynamics to make sure women's voices were equally heard and valued.
Holding people accountable.
Right. It shows it can be done when the issues are faced head on.
Ultimately, it feels like a call to acknowledge the difference, the real ones we see, but then work actively to transcend them. To get to true equality in perception and expectation, not just opportunity on paper.
Yeah. It briefly touches on the queen bee thing, women who pull up the ladder, but thankfully counters it with the more positive trend of high-potential women actively sponsoring and helping others, paying it forward.
And it definitely doesn't dismiss the contributions of stay-at-home parents.
No, it recognizes that vital community-building work and draws inspiration from women who've leaned in across their whole lives in many roles, paid and unpaid. Like the author's mother, showing a lifetime of engagement.
So this deep dive, based on these sources, it's really explored that intersection. Internal barriers, career strategy, home life, society.
Yeah, trying to understand why progress feels stalled sometimes. looking at things like imposter syndrome, external attribution, that likability penalty,
Considering advice like the jungle gym career path, the need for sponsors.
and hearing those powerful data-driven points about childcare, partnership, and the real cost of taking time out.
So, as you listen and reflect on this, what resonated most with you? Was it the ambition gap data, the imposter syndrome examples, that frustrating likability penalty?
Or maybe the surprise of the childcare findings.
Hmm.
What assumption did this deep dive challenge for you?
And maybe think about that stark data. Parental behavior mattering so much more than childcare type, alongside all that maternal guilt. What does our society truly seem to value when it comes to raising the next generation?
And how might you, based on these insights, perhaps redefine success, contribution, and partnership in your own life? What truly matters most to you and your family?
Thanks for listening. Visit our library and subscribe below for more book summaries. This has been a Sprint Reads production.